My name is Carol Albright, I'm 65, and I found out my daughter got married when she told me I wasn't one of the special people invited. Before I tell you how that single cruel sentence led to a courtroom battle for my own sanity, and every last cent of my retirement fund, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It all started on a Tuesday afternoon. The Texas sun was beating down on my little garden outside Austin, and I was sitting in my favorite armchair, my old golden retriever Sparky, asleep at my feet. For a retired history teacher like me, life was quiet. My husband, Robert, passed away 5 years ago, so my world for the longest time had revolved entirely around my only child, my daughter, Jessica. For a few weeks, she'd been distant, and I'd been chalking it up to wedding planning stress. Every time I called, it went to voicemail. So when she finally picked up, a wave of relief washed over me. I could hear the faint sound of traffic in the background. "Hi, honey." I started, trying to keep my voice light. "Just calling to see. When is the big day? I haven't heard anything, and I want to make sure I have everything ready." The line went quiet. It was a heavy, loaded silence that stretched for what felt like an eternity. I could hear her take a breath. Then her voice came, and it was a tone I'd never heard from her before. It was sharp, cold, and dripping with a smugness that chilled me to the bone. "It was yesterday, Mom," she said, as casually as if she were talking about the weather. "It was a private thing. Just for special people. Just for special people." The words didn't register at first. They just hung there in the air between Austin and wherever she was. I felt the phone grow heavy in my hand, suddenly cold against my ear. My own daughter. My only child. Married. And I wasn't special enough. The air rushed out of my lungs. It felt like a physical blow. A punch to the gut that left me breathless. I couldn't form a word. My mind was just a white-hot blank of pain. All I could see was a montage, a rapid-fire reel of the last 3 years of my life. I saw myself at the bank month after month setting up the automatic transfer. $600 every first of the month, for their rent in that trendy downtown apartment I could never afford myself. I saw the late-night text messages. "Mom, the car broke down, we need $400. Mom, Kevin's promotion fell through. Can you help with groceries?" I saw myself using my meager pension, the money Robert and I had saved for my old age, to wire them money for a vacation to Cancun because they needed a break. Every single time I had justified it. I told myself it was the price of admission to her life. A mother's love, I thought, didn't come with a price tag. It was just love. Unconditional. I had sacrificed my financial security, my peace of mind, all for her. And for what? To be told I wasn't on the list. My gaze drifted across the living room to my closet door. Hanging there, protected in a plastic garment bag, was a sky blue silk dress. I'd bought it 3 months ago. It was the most expensive piece of clothing I'd owned since my own wedding dress. I could picture it so clearly in my mind. Me standing beside Jessica, the Texas sun glinting off the beautiful fabric in the wedding photos that were supposed to last a lifetime. I had imagined the pride, the joy, the tears. Now that dress looked like a cruel joke. A costume for a play I'd never been cast in. It was a ghost of a memory that never even got the chance to be made. "Mom? Are you still there?" Jessica's voice, impatient now, crackled through the phone, pulling me from my haze. I couldn't speak. What was there to say? How do you respond to being erased from the most important day of your child's life? My silence was my only answer. "Look, I have to go," she said dismissively. "Kevin's parents are taking us out. I'll talk to you later." And then she hung up. The dial tone buzzed in my ear, a mocking sound in the sudden, crushing silence of my house. I slowly lowered the phone, my hand trembling so hard I could barely place it back in its cradle. I just sat there staring at that blue dress. The hurt was so deep, so absolute. It felt like it was hollowing me out, scooping out everything inside me until there was nothing left but a raw, empty ache. My whole body felt numb, except for the hot tears that started to silently stream down my face. But then, as I sat there in that void, something else began to bubble up from that empty space. It started as a flicker, a tiny spark in the cold darkness. Then it grew. Something hot and sharp that crawled up my throat. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was rage. Pure, undiluted rage. And with my hands still shaking, I pushed myself out of the chair, walked over to my little wooden desk in the corner, and yanked open the top drawer. I pushed past old letters and photos until my fingers found what I was looking for. I pulled out the checkbook register, then the thick manila folder where I kept my finances. I took out every single bank statement from the last 3 years. For 2 days I did nothing. I sat in my armchair, the bank statements spread out on the coffee table like a battlefield map. The numbers swam before my eyes. Sparky, sensing my distress, never left my side, his warm head resting on my knee. I didn't answer the phone. I didn't check the mail. I just existed in a fog of betrayal. But the human mind is a curious masochistic thing. You know you shouldn't look. You know it will only bring more pain, but you can't stop yourself. Late on the third night, I found myself opening my laptop. My fingers, almost of their own accord, typed Kevin's name into the search bar. His social media profile was public. And there it was. An album posted just 2 days ago, titled The Beginning of Forever. My heart hammered against my ribs as I clicked on it. The first photo was of them. Jessica, my Jessica, was a stranger in a ridiculously expensive-looking lace gown. She was radiant, smiling a wide, triumphant smile I hadn't seen in years. She was holding Kevin's arm, and he was looking down at her with a proprietary smirk. They were standing in front of a grand, white-columned mansion that looked like something out of a magazine. I clicked through the photos, each one a fresh stab to the heart. There were Kevin's parents, his father a stern-looking man in a tailored suit, his mother a thin woman with a pinched face and a string of pearls, both raising champagne glasses. There were Kevin's siblings laughing and posing. There were dozens of people, all of them strangers, all of them dressed to the nines, all of them part of this secret, special world. These were the special people. The ones who owned wineries and law firms. The ones who looked at my modest, paid-off home in a quiet suburb as if it were a shack. I remembered the one time I'd met Kevin's mother at a disastrous Christmas dinner. She'd asked me what I did, and when I said I was a retired history teacher, she'd given me a pitying little smile and said, "Oh, how quaint." Jessica was so desperate to be one of them. And I, her simple schoolteacher mother, was the embarrassing baggage she had to cut loose to make the final ascent. I wasn't just uninvited, I was an obstacle. An inconvenience. My breath hitched when I landed on a close-up shot of Jessica, laughing as she fed Kevin a piece of cake. I zoomed in on the dress. The intricate lace, the delicate beading on the bodice. It was beautiful. And it was sickeningly familiar. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking. I scrolled back through months of text messages until I found it. An image she'd sent me 6 weeks ago. It was a screenshot of that exact dress from a designer's website. The text beneath it read, "Mom, the roof is leaking again, the landlord won't fix it. The repair guy quoted us $2,000. We just don't have it." $2,000. A huge chunk of my savings. I remembered the panic in her message, the feigned desperation. I had transferred the money that very hour, feeling a surge of motherly pride that I could still be her safety net. I had pictured them safe and dry in their apartment. The reality was so much uglier. I hadn't paid for a roof repair. I had paid for the very dress that symbolized my exclusion. I had literally bought my own ticket out of her life. I had funded my own humiliation. A wave of nausea washed over me. I slammed the laptop shut. The soft click echoed in the silent room. There was no more room for tears. The well of my grief had run dry, and at the bottom there was something hard and cold. It was the icy clarity of truth. The years of sacrifice, the endless river of money. It wasn't love. It was a transaction. And my side of the bargain, a place in her life, a seat at her wedding, had been voided. I looked at the pile of bank statements on my coffee table. They were no longer just records of payments. They were evidence. Exhibits in the case of my own foolishness. The rage from before was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. A quiet, chilling resolve. The fog of pain was lifting, and I was finally seeing my daughter for who she truly was. Not the little girl who used to run to me during thunderstorms, but a cold, calculating stranger who saw me as nothing more than a bank account. Grief was a luxury I couldn't afford, because I knew with a chilling certainty that the phone would ring again. And it wouldn't be a call of apology. The call came exactly 1 week later. A Tuesday again. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when my phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with her picture. A part of me, the mother part that was so deeply ingrained it felt like my own DNA, wanted to ignore it. to let it go to voicemail and pretend I didn't see it. But the new me, the woman forged in the fire of last week's revelation, picked it up on the second ring. "Hello, Jessica," I said. My voice was even, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "Mom." Her voice was a syrupy sweet sound that set my teeth on edge. It was the voice she used when she wanted something. I was getting worried. "You haven't been answering." "I've been busy," I replied, which was true. I'd been busy going through 3 years of my life with a highlighter and a calculator. "Oh, okay. Well, listen, the reason I'm calling is, you must have forgotten this month. The rent money hasn't come through, and the landlord is sending these awful emails. He's threatening us with eviction." There it was. The casual entitlement. The assumption that my money was her money, that my purpose was to ensure her life continued uninterrupted, no matter the cost to my own. The old me would have been a flurry of apologies and promises. The old me would have been rushing to the bank, heart pounding with manufactured urgency, blaming myself for the oversight. The habit of sacrifice was a deep, well-worn groove in my soul. But something had snapped. I looked down at Sparky, who was watching me with his wise old eyes. I thought of the blue dress in the closet. I thought of the wedding photos. I thought of the word special people. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I leaned against the kitchen counter, grounding myself. "Jessica," I said, and my voice was so calm it sounded like it belonged to someone else. "Didn't I tell you? I only help special people." Dead silence. I could practically hear the gears grinding to a halt in her brain. It was a silence so profound I could picture her face, the sweet, manipulative mask falling away to reveal the stunned disbelief beneath. "What?" she finally stammered. "What did you just say?" "You heard me," I said, still calm. "My help, my money, it's reserved for special people only. And since I wasn't special enough to be invited to your wedding, I have to assume I'm no longer on that list." "Mom, don't be cruel," she hissed, the sweetness in her voice curdling into venom. "This isn't a joke. We could be homeless." Cruel. The word echoed in my ears. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Cruel as finding out your only child got married from a cold, dismissive phone call. Cruel as realizing you paid for the wedding dress you weren't allowed to see in person. This, Jessica, isn't cruelty. This is a consequence. My hand was shaking, but not from fear or weakness. It was shaking with the sheer force of holding my ground for the first time in years. "I have to go," I said, my voice firm. "I'm making dinner." I ended the call before she could reply, before she could weave another web of excuses or accusations. I placed the phone on the counter and stood there, my own breathing loud in the sudden quiet of the kitchen. My chest felt light. The crushing weight that had been sitting on it for years was gone. The next morning, I took my meticulously highlighted bank statements and my calculator to the dining room table. I went through everything line by line. Rent. $600 a month for 36 months. $21,600. Emergency car repairs. $400. $750. $300. $1,450. Groceries and utilities. At least $200 a month conservatively. $7,200. The leaky roof. That was actually a wedding dress. $2,000. The Cancun vacation. $1,250. And countless smaller transfers, $50 here, $100 there, for things I could no longer even remember. I clicked the final equals button on the calculator. The number that stared back at me made me feel sick. $41,500. I had given my daughter, my grown married daughter, over $40,000. It was a down payment on a house. It was a new car. It was years of comfortable retirement. It was a significant portion of Robert's life insurance, the inheritance he'd left to make sure I was taken care of. That afternoon, I walked into my local bank. The manager, a kind man named Mr. Henderson who had processed so many of my transfers, greeted me with a smile. "The usual, Mrs. Albright?" he asked. "No, David," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Actually, the opposite. I need to cancel every single automatic payment I have scheduled." He blinked, surprised. "All of them? Are you sure? The one to your daughter? You haven't missed a payment in 3 years." "I'm sure," I said, meeting his eyes. "It's long overdue." As I signed the paperwork, I felt a click, like a lock disengaging in my soul. I walked out of the bank, and the Texas air felt cooler, crisper. The sun seemed brighter. For the first time in a very long time, my money was my own. My future was my own. I felt free. But freedom, I would soon learn, comes at a very high price. The silence was the first thing I noticed. For 3 years, my phone had been a constant source of interruptions. Texts, calls, demands disguised as conversations. Now it was mute. Days went by. Not a single, "I love you, Mom." Not even a hollow, "How are you?" Just nothing. The void they left was more telling than any angry words they could have hurled at me. But they weren't just being silent. They were being strategic. Jessica and Kevin weren't the types for a loud, screaming confrontation. Their methods were more insidious, like a slow-acting poison. It started subtly. Our mailman, Tom, who usually had a cheerful word for me, started looking at me with an expression of deep pity. He'd hand me my mail and hurry away, avoiding my eyes. Then Mrs. Gable from 2 houses down, who I always chatted with when she was out walking her poodle, saw me in my yard and abruptly crossed the street. At the grocery store, the young woman at the checkout who always asked about my garden suddenly became very focused on scanning my items, offering only a tight, forced smile. I was being shunned. It was a strange, unsettling feeling, like being behind invisible glass. I could see my community, but I was no longer a part of it. I started to feel a creeping paranoia. Were they talking about me? What could they possibly be saying? The answer came on a Thursday evening. My next-door neighbor, Susan Miller, a retired nurse and a genuinely kind soul, knocked on my door holding a plate of still warm chocolate chip cookies. We'd been friendly for years, sharing garden tools and watching each other's houses during vacations. "Carol, can I come in for a minute?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. I ushered her in, and we sat at my kitchen table. Sparky immediately laid his head on her lap. "I don't want to meddle," she began, twisting a napkin in her hands, "but I think you should know something. I ran into Kevin at the hardware store this morning." My stomach tightened. "Oh, he was telling me and a few other people how worried he and Jessica are about you." I just stared at her, waiting. "He said you've been different since your husband passed. That you're getting forgetful." Susan looked pained to be repeating the words. "He said you accused Jessica of stealing from you, that you've been having these paranoid fantasies. He made it sound like you're losing your grip, Carol. He said you were mismanaging your husband's inheritance, and he was worried you'd end up with nothing." The cookie I was holding crumbled in my hand. It all clicked into place. The pitying looks, the averted gazes. They weren't just cutting me off financially. They were systematically destroying my reputation. They were painting me as a confused, unstable old woman, an unreliable narrator in my own life story. It was a brilliant, cruel strategy. Who would believe the crazy old mother over the concerned young daughter and her charming husband? They were laying the groundwork for something, discrediting the witness before she even had a chance to testify. "He said they've been trying to help you," Susan continued, her voice soft with anger on my behalf. "Trying to help you manage your finances, but you threw them out. He made you sound ungrateful and irrational." I felt a hot flash of rage crawl up my neck. I looked at Susan, this kind woman who had known me for 15 years, who had seen me grieve for Robert, who had watched me pour my heart and soul into raising Jessica. "Susan, he's lying," I said, my voice shaking with the effort of keeping it steady. "All of it. It's not about my memory. It's about my money. I stopped giving it to them, and this is their revenge." Susan reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. "I know, Carol," she said firmly. "I told him he was full of it. I've seen how you manage your home, how sharp you are. I know you. But not everyone does. They're poisoning the well. And I'm worried about what they're planning to do with that poisoned water." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken threat. I thanked her, my throat thick with emotion. After she left, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the streetlights flicker on. They were building a cage for me. Not with bars of steel, but with whispers and lies. A cage designed to make me look incompetent, to make my inevitable protests sound like the ravings of a madwoman. They weren't just cutting me off. They were trying to build a cage of whispers around me, and I was about to find out why. The ambush came 2 days later. I had taken Sparky for his slow, ambling afternoon walk around the block. As I turned the corner onto my street, a cold dread washed over me. A sleek black sedan I didn't recognize was parked in my driveway. Right behind it was Kevin's ostentatious SUV. My pulse quickened. I tightened my grip on Sparky's leash. I had a choice. I could turn around, walk away, and call the police. Or I could walk into my own home and face whatever they had planned. My pride, or maybe just my stubbornness, wouldn't let me back down. This was my house. Robert and I had built our lives here. I would not be run out of it. I walked up the driveway, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I noticed the front door was slightly ajar. They hadn't even bothered to wait for me to let them in. They'd used the spare key I'd given them years ago for emergencies. The violation of it made my blood run cold. I pushed the door open. The air inside felt frigid. And there they were. Jessica and Kevin stood in my dining room, flanking a man I'd never seen before. He was in his 50s with silver hair and a sharp, expensive-looking suit. He had the predatory stillness of a hawk. My dining table, where I ate my breakfast every morning, was covered in my personal documents, bank statements, tax returns, the deed to my house. They were scattered across the polished wood as if they were vultures picking over a carcass. "Mom," Jessica began, her voice oozing a sickly sweet concern that was more insulting than any shout. "Thank God you're home. We were so worried. This is Mr. Henderson, a financial advisor. He's a friend of Kevin's father." The man Henderson gave me a smooth, professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "A pleasure, Mrs. Albright. Your children have expressed some profound concerns about your financial well-being. I'm just here to help you get things in order, create a more stable plan for your future." Kevin stood with his arms crossed, a smug, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. The outcome in his mind was already sealed. My eyes fell on the folder Henderson was sliding across the table toward me. It was thick, official-looking. And on the top page I could read the bolded words. "Durable power of attorney." The world tilted. The whispers, the lies, the isolation, it all led to this moment. They weren't just trying to make me look incompetent. They were trying to get it legally certified. They wanted me to sign away control of everything I owned. My home. My savings. My pension. My entire life. They wanted to turn me into a child, a ward of the state with them as my generous, loving guardians, while they bled my accounts dry. For a long second, fear threatened to swallow me whole. I felt small and old and utterly alone. I could feel their collective will pressing down on me, expecting me to crumble, to sign the papers just to make them leave. Then I looked past them at the framed photo of Robert on the sideboard. He was smiling, his eyes full of the quiet strength I had always loved, and something inside me solidified. The fear was burned away by a white-hot surge of pure, unadulterated fury. I didn't say a word. In one swift, silent motion I walked to the table, picked up the entire folder of documents and turned around. Jessica's mouth opened to speak, but she was too late. I walked directly to the small office shredder I kept by my desk. With a decisive shove, I fed the entire thick folder into the slot. The machine roared to life. The sound was deafening in the tense silence of the room. It was a vicious, grinding shriek as the machine's teeth tore through their carefully laid plans, spitting them out into a basket of meaningless confetti. I turned to face them, my hands planted firmly on my hips. Jessica's face was a mask of shocked outrage. Kevin's smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of raw fury. Mr. Henderson looked utterly flabbergasted. "There is a transition happening here," I said, and my voice was sharp and loud, echoing off the walls. "It's the transition of all three of you from my dining room to the front door. Get out." "Mom, how could you?" Jessica shrieked, her voice rising with practiced innocence. "We are trying to help you." "Help me?" I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You're trying to rob me. You're trying to steal my life while I'm still living it. You think I'm stupid. You think because I'm old, I'm an idiot. You see." Kevin sneered at Henderson. "This is what we have to deal with. Paranoia." "My peace of mind," I said, pointing a trembling finger toward the door, "will return the exact moment you leave my property. Out. Now." For a long, tense beat, no one moved. Then Henderson, realizing he wasn't getting his commission today, quickly gathered his briefcase and scurried out without a backward glance. Kevin shot me a look of pure hatred, muttering something under his breath before stomping out after him. Jessica lingered for a moment, her eyes welling up with crocodile tears. "You'll regret this," she whispered. "The only thing I regret," I said, my voice like ice, "is the 30 years I wasted thinking you loved me." I slammed the door behind her and bolted it. My breath came in ragged gasps. My whole body was trembling from the storm of adrenaline and rage. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, listening to the sound of their cars speeding away. I had won the battle, but I had a sickening feeling they had just declared a war. I spent the next 2 days in a state of high alert. I changed the locks. I had a security camera installed on my front porch. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, peering out the windows every time a car drove by. The confrontation had left me shaken, but also strangely empowered. I had faced them down and won. I had underestimated them, but they had also underestimated me. I thought, foolishly, that they might back off for a while, regroup after their failed ambush. I never imagined how low they would be willing to go. I never conceived of the cruelty they were truly capable of. It happened on a Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen, humming to myself as I made coffee. Sparky was dozing in a patch of sunlight on the floor. It was a peaceful, normal moment. Then the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw a white van parked at the curb with the city logo on the side. A man in a light blue uniform stood on my porch holding a clipboard. I opened the door cautiously. "Ma'am," he said, not unkindly. "I'm with the Austin Animal Center. We received an anonymous report concerning the welfare of a dog at this address." The words didn't compute. I just stared at him blankly. "A report? What kind of report?" "A report of neglect, ma'am," he said, looking past me into the house. "That the animal is not being properly fed or cared for, that it's living in unsanitary conditions." The world went silent. A cold, ringing noise started in my ears. Neglect. Sparky. My Sparky. The loyal, loving companion who had been my shadow for 14 years. The one who had licked the tears off my face after Robert died. The one I cooked special meals for because his old teeth couldn't handle dry kibble anymore. He was the one pure, uncomplicated love I had left in my life. And they were coming for him. This wasn't about money anymore. This wasn't about my house or my inheritance. This was an act of pure, sadistic evil. It was a calculated strike at the one thing they knew would shatter me. They couldn't get my assets, so they were trying to take my heart. "That's a lie," I whispered, my voice choked. "That is a vicious, horrible lie." The man's expression softened a little. "Ma'am, I have to follow up on every call. May I come in?" I was frozen in a state of shock and horror. But some survival instinct kicked in. I stepped aside, my body trembling so violently, I had to grip the doorframe to stay upright. He stepped inside. At that exact moment, Sparky, hearing a new voice, lifted his head. He let out a soft woof and trotted over, his old tail giving a few hopeful thumps against the floor. He nudged the man's hand with his wet nose. The animal control officer looked down at Sparky. He saw a happy, well-groomed old dog, a little portly if anything. He saw the clean, fluffy dog bed in the corner of the living room. He saw the 2 bowls by the back door, one full of fresh water, the other still holding a few bites of the scrambled eggs and rice I'd made him for breakfast. His eyes scanned my spotless house. He knelt and scratched Sparky behind the ears. Sparky leaned into it, his eyes closing in bliss. The officer stood up, a look of weary disgust on his face. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at some unseen evil that would make such a call. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low. "I am so sorry to have bothered you. It's clear this was a malicious report. Your dog is obviously very well loved and cared for." He made a note on his clipboard. "We get these sometimes," he added, shaking his head. "Disputes between neighbors. Nasty divorce situations. People use animals as weapons. It's sick." I just nodded, unable to speak. My throat was tight with unshed tears of rage and relief. After he left, I locked the door and slid down to the floor. I wrapped my arms around Sparky's warm body and buried my face in his soft fur. And I finally broke. The sobs that racked my body were not from sadness. They were from a depth of fury I had never known I possessed. They had come after my home. Now they were coming after the only living thing I loved unconditionally. Lying there on the floor, clutching my dog, I made a decision. I was done being on the defensive. I was done reacting to their attacks. It was time for me to fight back. I was no longer just a mother trying to protect her assets. I was a woman fighting for her life, and for the life of her best friend. That afternoon, my hands still shaking but my mind clear as a bell, I went online. I remembered a friend from my book club mentioning a legal aid center for seniors. I found their website and the name of a lawyer they recommended for cases of elder abuse. David Chen. I picked up the phone and dialed his number. They had made their final mistake. Meeting David Chen was like finding a lighthouse in a hurricane. He was younger than I expected, with a calm, focused demeanor that immediately put me at ease. His office was small and unassuming, piled high with files, but he listened to my entire story without interruption, his expression growing more grim with every detail I shared. When I finished, breathless and emotionally drained, he leaned back in his chair. "Carol," he said, his voice firm but kind, "let's call this what it is. This is a classic textbook case of attempted financial elder abuse. The whispers to the neighbors, the ambush with the power of attorney, and now using animal control as a weapon. That's a new low, even for cases I've seen." For the first time, I felt a flicker of validation. I wasn't being paranoid. I wasn't overreacting. I was a victim of a calculated campaign. "They're escalating," he continued, steepling his fingers. "Their initial plans failed, so they're getting more desperate. And desperation makes people reckless. We need to get ahead of them. I want you to gather every single piece of evidence you have. Every bank statement, every canceled check, every text message where she asked for money. We're going to build a fortress of facts." I spent the next week doing just that. It was a painful, meticulous process, reliving every lie, every act of manipulation. But with each document I added to the file, I felt stronger. I was no longer just a collection of painful memories. I was building a case. Just as David had predicted, the next blow wasn't long in coming. A registered letter arrived, bearing the official seal of the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was a formal notice. A report had been filed by a concerned family member, Jessica of course, expressing grave concerns about my deteriorating mental state and ability to live independently. An adult protective services caseworker would be conducting a home visit. My first instinct was panic. The government was getting involved. But then I looked at the thick binder of evidence I had assembled on my dining table. I took a deep breath and called David. "It's here," I said. "They've called Adult Protective Services." "Good," he said to my surprise. "Let them come. This is their next move and we are ready for it. I will be there with you." The caseworker, a tired-looking woman named Ms. Davis, arrived 3 days later. David was already there, sitting with me at the kitchen table, a reassuringly solid presence. I let Ms. Davis in. She had a professional but wary look on her face. I could only imagine the stories Jessica had fed her. "Mrs. Albright," she began, "I'm here to follow up on some concerns regarding your well-being." Before she could continue, David spoke up. "Ms. Davis, thank you for coming. Mrs. Albright is happy to cooperate fully. But before you begin your assessment, we believe it's important for you to have the full context." And with that, he opened the binder. For the next hour, we walked her through it. We showed her the bank statements, the transfer slips totaling over $40,000. We showed her the text messages, a relentless stream of requests and demands. We explained the ambush with the power of attorney documents. David calmly detailed the malicious and unfounded call to animal control. I answered all of Ms. Davis's questions clearly and concisely. I showed her my organized pantry, my clean home, my calendar with doctor's appointments and social engagements neatly written in my own hand. As she listened, I saw the suspicion in her eyes slowly melt away, replaced by a dawning understanding, and then by a quiet, professional anger. She was seeing the full picture, not the distorted caricature Jessica had painted. She was seeing a competent, independent woman being systematically harassed by her greedy children. Finally, she closed her notebook. "Mrs. Albright," she said, her tone completely changed. "Based on my observations and the documents you've provided, I see no evidence whatsoever that you are incapable of managing your own affairs. In fact, I see quite the opposite. I will be closing this case as unfounded." A wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy washed over me. When David walked her to the door, I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly weak. "They failed again," I whispered when he came back. David's expression was grave. He sat down opposite me. "Yes, they did. But Carol, you have to understand what this means. They've tried manipulation, they've tried intimidation, they've tried using government agencies against you. They have only one move left." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "They're going to take you to court. They're going to file for guardianship. They are going to stand up in front of a judge and argue that you are legally incompetent. They are going to try to have you stripped of all your rights." The social worker had closed her file, but I knew my daughter was just opening a new one, this one stamped with the letterhead of the county court. The official court summons arrived a week later. It felt heavier than a simple stack of paper. It felt like the weight of my entire life being put on trial. The legal jargon was dense and intimidating, but the core of it was brutally simple. Jessica Albright and Kevin Peters, petitioners, versus Carol Albright, respondent. They were petitioning the Travis County Court for a total guardianship over my person and my estate. My hands shook as I read their sworn affidavit. It was a masterpiece of fiction. They painted a picture of a loving daughter and son-in-law, desperately trying to save their tragic, senile mother from herself. They claimed I was squandering my late husband's life insurance on frivolous things, that I was suffering from severe paranoia, and that I had become a danger to myself. But the most painful part was the list of witnesses they intended to call. There was our mailman Tom. There was Mrs. Gable, the neighbor who now crossed the street to avoid me. And to my utter shock, there was Mr. Abernathy, the pharmacist I had trusted for 20 years. A man who had always asked after Robert during his illness. I couldn't understand it. How could he betray me like that? "They lied to him," David Chun said calmly over the phone after I read him the list. "I guarantee it. They probably gave him some sob story, handed him a pre-written statement full of vague language about concern for your well-being, and he signed it without thinking. We will deal with him on the stand." His confidence was a lifeline. "What do we do now?" I asked. "Now," he said, "we take away their ammunition. Every last bullet. I've scheduled an appointment for you with a forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Lena Morgan. She's the best in the state. She will conduct a full, independent mental competency evaluation. It's not because you need it, Carol. It's because we need a weapon of our own. An unbiased expert opinion that will blow their entire case out of the water." 2 days later, I sat in Dr. Morgan's quiet, tasteful office. She was a brisk, no-nonsense woman who put me through hours of tests. She asked me about my finances, my family history, current events. She gave me memory tests, logic puzzles, and complex hypothetical scenarios to solve. With each question I answered, I felt a piece of my confidence returning. I wasn't the confused old woman they claimed I was. I was sharp. I was competent. I was me. At the end of the grueling 4-hour session, she set down her clipboard and looked at me over the top of her glasses. "Mrs. Albright," she said with a small smile, "your daughter is either delusional or a liar. Your cognitive functions are not just adequate, they are well above average for your age. There is absolutely no clinical basis for a guardianship. I will state as much in my official report to the court." The words were a balm to my wounded soul. And yet, a knot of fear remained in my stomach. A judge was only human. Jessica could cry on command. What if the judge was swayed by her performance? What if their lies were more convincing than my truth? The thought of my life being handed over to them, of my accounts being frozen, of losing my home, my dignity. It was a terror that kept me awake at night. That afternoon there was a knock on my door. It was Susan, my neighbor, holding a plate of brownies. "Peace offering," she said with a warm smile. I invited her in, and over coffee I poured out everything: the court summons, the list of witnesses, the evaluation with Dr. Morgan. She listened patiently, her expression growing angrier and angrier on my behalf. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Carol," she said, her eyes fierce, "you are not alone in this. They have me listed as a potential witness, you know. Kevin tried to sweet-talk me into it. I told him where he could shove his petition. I gasped. And what's more, she continued, I will be testifying. For you. I will stand up in that courtroom and tell the judge exactly what I have seen. I will tell them about your kindness, your clarity, and your daughter's greed. We will not let them erase you. I squeezed her hand, tears of gratitude welling in my eyes. The battle ahead was still terrifying, but for the first time, I felt like I had an army at my back. You know, having a good neighbor can be more valuable than gold. And at that moment I knew I wasn't fighting alone anymore. But I also knew the hardest part was yet to come. With the doctor's report in one hand and my neighbor's support in my heart, I prepared for the performance of my daughter's life. The courthouse smelled of old paper, floor polish, and stale anxiety. It was a cold, impersonal place designed to intimidate. I sat beside David Chun at the respondent's table, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. When the bailiff called our case, a hush fell over the small courtroom, and then they swept in. Jessica, Kevin, and their slick, expensive-looking lawyer. It was a calculated entrance. Jessica was dressed head to toe in somber black, as if attending a funeral. A single perfect tear traced a path down her cheek. Kevin looked solemn and burdened, the very picture of a dutiful son-in-law forced into a painful situation. It was a disgusting, brilliant performance. Jessica was called to the stand first. She clutched a tissue in her hand and spoke in a soft, trembling voice that was just loud enough for the judge to hear. My mother, she's not the woman she used to be, she began, her voice breaking dramatically. Her decline since my father's death, it devastates us. She isolates herself. She spends money irrationally, thousands of dollars, and we don't know where it goes. She's become so paranoid. We only want to protect her. We want to make sure she's safe. The tears began to flow freely now, shining like jewels under the fluorescent courtroom lights. She looked at the judge, her eyes wide with feigned grief and sincerity. It was a compelling show. I could feel the sympathy in the room shifting towards her. I glanced at Judge Miller, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, and saw a flicker of compassion in her eyes. My stomach plummeted. Then David Chun rose for the cross-examination. His voice was calm, almost gentle. Miss Peters, he began, you say you're worried about your mother's isolation. Can you tell the court how many times you visited her in the last 6 months? Jessica hesitated. We've been very busy. With the wedding and... So 0 times? David pressed, still gentle. And can you tell us, in that same 6-month period, how many times you've called your mother without asking her for money? Jessica froze. The silence stretched. It grew awkward, then painful. She stared at him, her mouth slightly open, a deer in the headlights. The judge looked up from her notes, her pen hovering in the air. I don't keep a log, Jessica finally mumbled. Let's talk about the wedding, David continued, his voice still even. Is it true that your mother paid for your wedding dress? Color rushed into her cheeks. She gave me a gift. It was to help with expenses. A $2,000 gift for a leaky roof that was actually for a wedding dress, correct? That's not. And is it true, David's voice sharpened ever so slightly, that you told your mother, the woman who paid for your dress, that she was not invited to your wedding because it was just for special people? Those words were taken out of context, she snapped, her composure finally cracking. The mask of the grieving daughter slipped, revealing the angry, entitled woman beneath. Thank you, Miss Peters. No further questions. Kevin took the stand next, doubling down on the narrative. He painted me as an unstable, paranoid woman, describing my decision to change my locks and install a security camera as proof of my delusional state. He smirked as he spoke, the picture of concerned reason. Then they called Mr. Abernathy, the pharmacist. He looked deeply uncomfortable. Under their lawyer's questioning, he confirmed he had signed a statement expressing concern. But when David cross-examined him, the truth came out. Mr. Abernathy, David said kindly, when you signed this paper, did you believe you were signing a legal document to have Mrs. Albright declared incompetent? Good heavens, no, the man sputtered, his face turning red. Her daughter came to me in tears, saying her mother was being scammed by telemarketers. She said they just needed a statement from a longtime acquaintance for the bank to put a flag on her account for her own protection. I thought I was helping. The foundation of their case was crumbling. Their star witnesses were turning out to be either resentful neighbors with petty grievances or good people who had been duped by Jessica's lies. Finally, the bailiff called my name. Carol Albright to the stand. My legs felt like lead as I walked to the witness box. This was it. Everything came down to this moment. I sat down, straightened my back, and looked directly at Judge Miller. Their lies were stacked high, but my lawyer had just lit a match at the very foundation. And now it was my turn to speak my truth. Mrs. Albright, David began, his voice a calm anchor in the turbulent courtroom. Please just tell the judge what has happened over the last few years. I took a deep breath. I didn't look at Jessica. I didn't look at Kevin. I looked only at Judge Miller. I spoke slowly, clearly, letting the facts speak for themselves. I told her about the 3 years of financial support. I stated the final number, $41,500, and saw a flicker of shock in the judge's eyes. I told her about the phone call, about the cruel words special people. I described the pain of seeing the wedding photos online, and the sickening realization that I had paid for the dress. My voice broke just for a moment, but I pushed through. I told her about the ambush in my dining room, about the power of attorney documents they tried to trick me into signing. And then, my voice growing hard with an anger that was still so raw, I told her about the call to animal control. Your Honor, I said, my voice trembling with emotion. They tried to take my dog. My Sparky. He is 14 years old. He is all I have left of my family. They knew that taking him would destroy me. This was never about concern. It has only ever been about control and money. A murmur went through the small gallery. I saw one of the court clerks shake her head in disgust. Jessica sat rigid, her face pale, her performance forgotten. David then called Susan to the stand. My wonderful neighbor testified with a quiet, firm dignity. She spoke of my sharp mind, my active social life, my meticulous care for my home and garden. She told the court about the poisonous whispers Kevin had been spreading, and how it didn't match the competent, kind woman she had known for 15 years. Finally, David submitted Dr. Morgan's comprehensive psychiatric evaluation into evidence. He read excerpts from the report aloud, the clinical professional language, a stark contrast to Jessica's emotional hysterics. Cognitive functions well above average, no evidence of paranoia or delusion, demonstrates excellent financial literacy and judgment, no clinical basis for a guardianship whatsoever. The case was laid bare. A story of greed, manipulation, and profound disrespect. When David rested our case, the courtroom was silent. Judge Miller looked from the report in her hands to me, and then to Jessica and Kevin. Her expression was like granite. I have heard enough, she said, her voice sharp and decisive. This court is prepared to make a ruling. My heart stopped. This was it. Judge Miller looked directly at Jessica and Kevin. Her gaze was withering. After reviewing the evidence and testimony presented today, this court finds that Mrs. Carol Albright is not only competent, but exceptionally so. She has demonstrated more grace and clarity under extreme duress than most people could muster. She paused, letting her words sink in. What I see here is not a case of a daughter's concern. What I see is a shameful, calculated attempt at financial exploitation. It is one of the more egregious examples of elder abuse I have seen in this courtroom. A sob of pure relief escaped my lips. It was over. I had won. The petition for guardianship is denied with prejudice, the judge declared, banging her gavel with a resounding crack. Which means you may not file this frivolous petition again. Furthermore, I am issuing a temporary restraining order, effective immediately. You are to have no contact with your mother, and are to remain at least 500 feet away from her and her property. This court is adjourned. The finality of the gavel was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. David put a steadying hand on my arm as I started to tremble with the release of all the tension. As they filed out, defeated and furious, Jessica had to walk past my table. She leaned in close, her face twisted with a naked, ugly hatred. You'll regret this, she whispered, her voice a venomous hiss. You'll die alone. I took a deep breath, looked her straight in the eye, and found the last words I would ever say to her. Better to be alone with dignity, I murmured, than surrounded by thieves. Her hateful words hung in the air, but they couldn't touch me. Because I wasn't just leaving a courthouse. I was walking into the first day of my new life. The first thing I did after leaving the courthouse was go straight to David Chen's office. The restraining order was a temporary shield, but I needed a permanent fortress. It's time to update your will and set up a trust, he advised, and I agreed wholeheartedly. We spent the afternoon drafting new documents. My previous will had, of course, left everything to Jessica. The new one was very different. I set up the Robert Albright Memorial Trust. My house, my savings, my pension, every last cent would go into it upon my death. And the trust's sole purpose? To provide grants to nonprofit organizations that offer free legal services to seniors fighting financial abuse. Jessica's name was not mentioned once. My daughter wanted my inheritance? Fine. She and people like her were the reason it would now be used to protect its victims. The pen felt powerful in my hand, a tool not of anger but of justice, a way to turn my pain into a shield for others. The next month was a whirlwind of change. The restraining order gave me the peace I needed to breathe again. But the house, my home of 40 years, felt tainted. Every room held a memory of betrayal. So I did something I never thought I would do. I sold it. I found a bright, beautiful 2-bedroom apartment downtown, with a balcony that overlooked the city. It was smaller, but it was mine. It held no ghosts. The air smelled of coffee shops and possibility. Sparky loved the new dog park just a block away. For the first time in years, I felt not just safe but light. I started to live again. Not as a mother, not as a widow, not as a victim, but as Carol. I joined a pottery class. I started volunteering at the very senior center that had led me to David. I sat at tables with men and women whose eyes held stories similar to my own. I told them my story not with shame but with strength. It became a warning, but also, I hoped, a symbol of hope. A reminder that it is never too late to say no. 6 months after the trial, I was sitting on my new balcony, sketching the sunset, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mom. It's me. We need to talk. I stared at the words for a long time. The old Carol would have felt a pang of hope, a desperate yearning for reconciliation. But the new Carol felt nothing but a weary certainty. I knew what talk meant. It was a prelude to a request. My fingers moved slowly over the screen. I thought about all the things I could say, all the anger I could unleash. Instead, I typed 5 simple words. Begin with an apology, not an amount. I sent the message and then, without waiting for a reply, I blocked the number. I silenced the last echo of my old life. I put the phone down and looked out at the city lights twinkling to life. I thought of Robert and I smiled. I whispered to his memory, I thought love had a price, my dear. Now I know. True love never sends an invoice. The night air wrapped around me, gentle and clear. I felt free. No longer an ATM with feelings, but a woman with a future that belonged entirely to me. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. It wasn't easy to share, but I believe in the power of speaking our truth. My question for you all is this. Have you ever had to draw a line in the sand with someone you love to protect your own peace and dignity? Let me know in the comments below. Your stories matter. And if my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more. You are not alone.